Tax season will be here before you know it. And if you're in need of some help filing your taxes this year, or dealing with tax debt, or you're looking for a new place to go, licensed insolvency trustee Mark Marshall with our partners at Allan Marshall Associates is here to share details on what you need to know before filing. Good morning, Mark.
Good morning.
Okay, so tax season, as I just mentioned, right around the corner. So what are some recommendations you have for individuals who need help avoiding falling into tax debt in the first place?
Well, it's one of those things is that generally individuals won't know that they have any tax debt until they've actually filed their tax returns. And so that is, key is step one is filing your tax returns. And then seeing where you stand. And generally, most employers, if you're a T4 employee, will be deducting enough income tax at source that you should be breaking even. You want to make sure in consulting with your employer is that they are withholding the proper amount of taxes at source. That would be step one, and that would help you alleviate any, surprises when you file your tax returns to see that there's the big tax debt. Another issue that people sometimes will run into to avoid tax debt is if they're working multiple jobs, is that they'll be taxed at source is by one employer or the two employers as if that's the only source of income they have. So the minimum taxes will be coming out, and it won't necessarily be enough with the two incomes driving them up into the next tax bracket. So a lot of times consulting with your employer to make sure that proper amount of taxes are withheld, making sure that they understand kind of where you stand as an employee, that you're working more than one job, and making sure that enough taxes are coming out at source. That'd be step number one.
Absolutely. And for someone who's already struggling with debt, when would you suggest that individual reach out for help if their tax debt feels like it's getting out of hand?
Well, I think it's one of those things. Again, I meet with clients on a daily basis. That some will be aware of their tax debt, and they'll come in and want to discuss options that we can help in terms of alleviating the tax pressure. Some people will come in and they'll be under the impression that they owe tax debt, but they haven't filed their tax returns, or maybe if they're self-employed, they haven't filed their HST returns up to date. So generally, again, the first thing that I would recommend to anybody that's concerned about their tax issues would be to make sure that they're filing everything up to date first. Know where they stand with the tax department and with the CRA, and then we can consult in terms of how things should be handled in terms of the pressure they might be having from the tax debt that's lingering around.
And speaking of options available, based on your experience, what is the most common factor that has led individuals to owing taxes and ultimately needing help from a licensed insolvency trustee?
I would say that the biggest issue we run into with people running into tax debt would be self-employed individuals, and dealing with HST or the GST component of that. The HST returns generally should be filed on a quarterly basis. Some, depending on the type of industry you're in, will do it on a yearly basis, but I'd recommend to most people to do it on a quarterly basis so that there's no end of the year surprises. But oftentimes that's the biggest issue that we're seeing is that, people will file their HST returns and they've been collecting HST, and instead of making the remittances, they've been using it for cash flow or to continue to business operations, when in fact it should be money that should be handed over to the CRA. So oftentimes when I meet with self-employed individuals, my number one recommendation is to make sure that they have a really good bookkeeper, make sure that they're doing their filings on a regular basis, making sure that they're setting up a separate account to make sure their HST remittances are set aside so that they can make sure that they can pay those on a quarterly basis.
And for anyone listening who is feeling overwhelmed or worried about debt that they owe, what is the most important thing you would want them to know?
Well, that there's options, especially when it comes to income tax, and the biggest misconception most people, and I'll hear it regularly, is they'll say, "Oh, I didn't think that I could do anything with the income tax owing, or I didn't think that I could do anything with any government debt." And in Canada, under the Bankruptcy and Insolvency Act, there's options available for people to deal with income tax debt or HST debts owing to the Crown. Is that either through a proposal or worst case scenario, a bankruptcy? There's options for people to alleviate that pressure. Unlike what they might kind of recognize, or the medium that they're following in the United States, it's a little different with the IRS, but in Canada, we do have options for that.
Very good information to know. Well, thank you so much for your time.
Okay, thank you.
And that was Mark Marshall with our partners over at Allan Marshall and Associates.